Good afternoon, everybody. I welcome you all on behalf of Climate Change Media Hub, an initiative launched by Asian College of Journalism from November last year with the support of Interlink Academy, Germany. My name is Athar Parvez, and I am a resident fellow at Asian College of Journalism, Climate Change Media Hub. Today, I have the pleasure of hosting this online session as part of our climate change conversation series at Climate Change Media Hub. The title of today's session is Climate Change in Indian Cities Hits and Misses. So, as the title suggests, we will be exploring the progress and gaps vis-a-vis climate change adaptation and mitigation in Indian cities. But before we dive deep into that conversation, into that discussion, let me quickly introduce the panelists for today's session. We have our first panelist is Ms. Pratigna Punacha. She is an interdisciplinary practitioner and researcher working at the intersections of climate change adaptation and urban and peri-urban geographies. Her work spans the built environment, heritage and conservation, urban planning, livelihood transitions, nature-based solutions, and migration. A consistent thread in her practice is translating research into policy and action through sustained stakeholder engagement and participatory methods. She has contributed to large multi-country projects across India, South Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. And our second panelist is Ms. Vaishnavi Rathore. She has been a climate and environment reporter for the past several years. She currently works with the Scroll, focusing on issues of land and climate through investigative and ground reported stories. She has won fellowships and grants through organizations like Earth Journalism Network and Pulitzer Center. She is a multi-award winner. So for this session, we have 45 minutes for the panelists to share their views and experiences. And the remaining 15 minutes will be Q&A. So you are welcome to ask your questions within those 15 minutes. You can, in fact, write your questions to us in the chat box. So you're welcome to that. So let's now dive into the discussion, and let me invite Pratigna to please start her presentation.
Thank you so much, Athar. Good afternoon, everyone. It is wonderful being here, speaking to young journalists, especially folks who's going to be reporting climate change, especially from India, on what is happening and how things are happening. So it's a great opportunity for me as well to speak a little bit about my work around cities. I have a presentation. Let me share this in a moment. Okay, so before I start speaking about the Indian context and climate action in the Indian context, let me provide a little bit of a global context to how cities should be viewed in the context of climate change, and then city action should be viewed in the context of climate change. So let's start with saying that everything is connected in an urban world. You know, we have a large urban population in the world currently. Never before in the history of our humanity have we seen that many urban residents, and this is an urban century, more or less. So in this urban century, everything is connected. Cities and towns, the economy, the human society, the activities we undertake are strongly coupled with the climate system as well as the ecosystem. So what we do in one system has a significant impact on the climate system and the biodiversity of the ecosystem or human systems ourselves. So especially in cities, where a lot of activity is concentrated, which has a lot of sort of emission of greenhouse gases, a lot of concentration of people and economic activity. Any changes or any sort of contribution towards climate change from the cities impact both the climate system as well as the ecosystem, and vice versa. What changes in the climate system happens are strongly felt in cities. At the current time, the global surface temperature has increased by about 1.4 degrees. If you remember, the Paris Climate Agreement was that we should stop increase to 1.5, but it doesn't by the end of the century. But it doesn't look like we're already at a 1.4-degree warming. And although this is the global surface temperature, if you look at this map, you see that cities are more heated as compared to its surrounding areas. So you see some cities like Kolkata or Tehran or Porto, which are marked in red. It means it is at least about 3.5 to 4 degrees warmer than its surrounding temperature. And of course, we can't sort of not mention the geopolitical crisis right now that is playing out significantly in Tehran. So there are reports that just this war is also causing the heating to accelerate quite a bit. So as it is, cities sort of concentrate heat, and now because of these geopolitical tensions, there's an added dimension which is contributing to the increasing heat. So cities are important when we consider, and they're also different when we consider the overall climate trends in the globe. Right? Why are cities hotter as such? Cities are usually warmer than their surrounding because of multiple factors. Be it the kind of geometry that the city follows, how densely the buildings are built, what kind of layout a city has, or what is the height and the size of the buildings, what kind of materials they use. Cities also concentrate heat from human activities. We have a lot of industrial activity, domestic heating, cooling, appliance usage. So as I was saying, there are many factors that sort of make cities different and usually warmer than their surroundings. City geometry was one, heat from human activities was one, and also the kind of materials that a city accumulates, through buildings, through the kind of roads that we build, through the kind of building materials. So all of these contribute to, in fact, sometimes almost up to 2 degrees warming in cities particularly. Now, while there are factors that contribute to warming, there are also factors in cities that contribute to cooling. So the presence of water bodies or the presence of vegetation can have a significant impact on what the local temperatures within cities would feel like. So water bodies have a potential of cooling or almost up to -1 degree Celsius, whereas green cover, vegetation, parks, forests have a potential of up to cooling of up to 1.5 degrees. So the way we think about how cities develop, the way we think about urbanization, all of this impact the way cities will feel the impacts of climate change, right? Moving forward. Yeah. And also, cities have a way of concentrating risk, which is specific to a urban context. So climate risk is exacerbated in urban areas by an interaction of the kind of hazards it feels, like heat or extreme rainfall or whatever, but also the kind of exposure that densely populated cities face. Different kinds of populations within cities face different kinds of exposure depending on where they are living. If usually in cities, informal settlements are placed next to vulnerable and precarious geographies, right? Maybe next to a nala or in next to railway lines or closer to the coast. All of these increase in exposure of population to climate impacts, but also vulnerabilities which are differential across cities. Different people have different intersections, have different vulnerabilities. The older population has a different kind of vulnerability as compared to young. Women have different vulnerabilities. So there are all different intersections based on which vulnerability and exposure differ. So here I'm trying to illustrate through an example of heat risk to human health. So if we were to consider human health, what kind of vulnerability reduction would sort of make a better case for human health. So we could think about livelihood diversification, we could think about better public health infrastructure. And similarly, if you were to think about exposure reduction, one could think about, what kind of shelters can we provide for vulnerable people, what kind of cooling spaces can we provide, what kind of work timings can are there work timings that can be modified in order to be less exposed to heat? And so these are the various ways of thinking about how to deal with risk in cities. So just to conclude this part of the presentation, cities and urban areas are both sources of climate forces in terms of emissions, in terms of factors that contribute to climate change, but they are also sites of innovation because of the large concentration of population, where we can think about innovation and implementation of different kinds of solutions in cities. Now, the way our cities will urbanize have a significant impact on the amount of greenhouse gas emissions, ecosystem degradation, and biodiversity loss. And therefore, thinking about how our cities will urbanize, how do we plan for our growing cities, become very important. So urban areas provide an opportunity for systemic and accelerated climate action, right? So now we'll move gears to think a little bit more about the landscape of climate action in Indian cities. So in Indian cities, yes, there's a lot of climate action happening already. And this is operationalized through multiple ways. At the national level, of course, we have the National Action Plan for Climate Change. But there are also different missions that think about climate change, not explicitly though. For example, the smart cities, the Amrut mission, all of them have sort of actions that think about mainstreaming climate action within them, but they don't necessarily term it as climate action, exclusively. So at the national level, there are certain mechanisms through which climate action is mainstreamed. There are also action plans at national, subnational, and city levels. We know of state level climate, the NAPCC, but also SAPCC, state level action plans for climate change. Then there is the city level action plans, such as the city level climate action plans. There are the heat action plans and such. Much of the action planning at the city level is operationalized with partnership, mostly international partnerships. There are many players such as the C40 cities, ICLEI, the Global Covenant of Mayors. So there are a lot of partnerships that cities are looking towards in order to operationalize their city action plans. In addition, there is also private and civil society initiatives that sort of take up this climate action plan. So a lot of private money, philanthropic money is going into climate action plans. There's also CSR initiatives that are going into climate action plans. So this is broadly the kind of mechanism through which climate action is being operationalized in the country. But having said that, the distribution is quite uneven. Implementation remains challenging. We do have a lot of plans, but they are not necessarily implemented and in the way that we'd like it to be implemented. And it is also constrained by financial, technical, governance, and administrative capacities at the city level. Right. So now we'll look a little bit at the city level climate action plans in specific. We do have a lot of examples of city level climate action plans, but it is a recent phenomena. So most of the plans have come about since the 2020s. I think the Mumbai Climate Action Plan, which was developed in 2022, was a forerunner for a lot of them. Despite having a lot of climate action plans now, yet the percentage remains quite small as compared to the overall requirement. We have a large number of towns as well in the country that are not necessarily seeing climate action plans right now. The focus of these climate action plans still remain on metros and larger cities. Most of the metros have it, but also some of the cities like Ahmedabad, Surat, Indore, they are also coming up with their own climate action plans. Like I said before, most of them are planned and delivered through external partners. They are also mostly mitigation oriented in the sense that they capture, for instance, there is a greenhouse gas inventory at the city level. Many of the interventions are towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions in terms of transport, in terms of industry. Also, because mitigation actions are easy to quantify as compared to adaptation actions. Adaptation actions are usually more difficult to quantify in terms of how much is achieved. So it's easier to perhaps focus on mitigation options. But some of them are also quite sector specific and hazard specific. Sometimes we have a heat action plan, sometimes we have a flood mitigation plan. They're also sector specific in terms of green transport plan, industry plan. So all of this come under the ambit of climate action plans at the city level. Since all of this is actually quite a recent phenomena, they are also in the early stages of operationalization and implementation, giving us quite a sort of opportunity to learn and implement from the early failures and to make systems much better in the longer run. Right. So now I want to focus a little bit more around heat in specific, and I will also share with you some work that I have been personally involved in along with my colleagues from IIHS. So I've just sort of tried to put in some headlines from newspaper articles, just showing us what is the kind of landscape of heat that we see in India. And this is a changing landscape, right? This first image here, heat wave alert across India from March to May, is from 2026. It's from a very recent article. And this report, and you may have heard the news that, in North India, already heat waves are being declared. And February was the hottest February recorded so far, and we may be going in a similar direction even for March. Okay, and we also see that 2024 was the hottest year ever recorded in India since, recording started in 1901. 2024 was also the hottest year globally. So we have had a trend of increasing heat in the country. We've seen the number of heat waves being declared on the rise. We've seen the impacts of heat quite significantly on health, on labor, on livelihood. We've also heard of nighttime temperature increasing and winter temperature increasing. So in summary, heat stress and extreme hot days are certainly increasing in intensity. The temperature is going far higher than it used to be. It is increasing in frequency. The number of hot days, the number of extreme heat events are also increasing. They are coming sooner than before. Like, we are hearing about heat waves in February already, which was quite unknown in the past. They are staying for longer. The heat wave period or the heat period is also now become longer than what it was. Nighttime temperatures are increasing, which means that's quite problematic, because at least earlier, even though the daytime temperature was high, nighttime would be a respite for the body to cool down and sort of reset, which is not happening right now. And now the winters are also getting warmer, so through the year there is no respite at all. So I'm going to speak a little bit from the work that we did, which was to sort of understand how are heat action plans being operationalized in cities in the country, and what insights can we glean from that on heat risk governance and incremental adaptation. So this work we undertook in 2024. And at that time, it was estimated that there were more than 100 plus heat action plans. And it's interesting, I recently read a report that reported that there are more than 250 heat action plans by now, right? So it's also interesting because although we have these numbers floating around, when we actually start to dig in, it's very difficult to put your hands on these actual documents, even if they do exist. So what are heat action plans? Heat action plans are basically a guidance document that is prepared either nationally or at the state level or even at the municipality level to sort of help governments prepare for, respond to, and also take some sort of proactive measures for the next heat season. So you see in this map that most of the districts already had heat action plans back in 2024, and 10 cities also had very specific, well-formulated heat action plan at the city level, which is what we studied. And the 10 cities that have been marked on the map are the cities that we studied, right? So in the heat governance architecture in India basically starts from the top. It's a top-down mechanism. It starts from NDMA, that's the National Disaster Management Authority at the national level, which prepares and gives out a very broad guidelines to the states, which then is taken up by the states under the State Disaster Management Authority. Then it comes down to the District Disaster Management Authority, and finally at the city level, it's undertaken at the municipality level or the municipal corporation level, and the municipal commissioner is usually the nodal officer who sort of oversees the functions of this particular heat action plan. And the nodal officer or the municipal commissioner then reaches out to multiple departments to operationalize the plan, including the health department, who's a very important actor, because one of the most important objectives of the heat action plan is to reduce mortality because of heat. So zero death is one of the most important objectives of any heat action plan. So therefore, health department becomes a very important player. There's also the electricity department, water department, education, public works, labor, women and child, and several other departments across the city with which the municipal commissioner coordinates or the nodal officer coordinates. And they also bring in the press and the civil society as actors in this to basically disseminate, build awareness, and ensure preparedness among the larger population of the city. So I'll go over this very quickly. At least the conceptual framework we used in trying to understand the heat action plans is that we took 3 thematic entry points, which was differential vulnerability, looking at how does heat action plans across these 10 cities address differential vulnerability. How do they address interventions prioritization? How do they prioritize different interventions? What is more important than the other? And how do they operationalize governance? Is governance something that is adaptive? Is it something that's learning? Is it reiterative? All of those questions. And we sort of conceptually categorized these 3 thematic entry points across 3 conceptual underpinnings. So we looked at whether these heat action plans were incremental in their nature, which means were they just doing some small adjustments to maintain status quo, not really changing too many systemic level things, but doing small things just so that whatever the condition is doesn't go worse. Or were they reformist in their nature? Were they changing something more, moving the needle on addressing systemic issues? Or were they transformative in their nature, where there were big shifts being taken up in order to sort of change the system? It's a system level response, which is what is ideal, right? So these were the 3 conceptual sort of categories under which we categorized the 10 heat action plans. So having done this review, what we see is that actually most of the heat action plans across cities in India fall somewhere between incremental and reformist heat action plans. Okay, so they're doing some small adjustments. For example, they're maybe increasing public awareness of heat risk, or they make some small changes around, what time do schools start, or what time should outdoor laborers not be out in the sun. Maybe they implement small changes like painting the roofs of vulnerable populations with white color of cool roof paint, which is a short-term solution. Maybe these solutions will hold good for this particular heat season, but it is not in any way going to shift something systemically, right? So most of the cities that we've looked at actually sit with anywhere between incremental and reformist actions, where this reformist action is slightly larger at scale, where they sort of think about developing a network of cooling shelters. Maybe it's not just in one location, but it is a series of locations. Maybe provide training for the health workers in the city, which is useful not just for this health season, but also the next health season. How to recognize heat stress, what do you have to do, creating emergency wards that can be activated every health season. And there are very few cities that actually sort of move towards sort of move towards climate action that are more transformative in nature. So, like have more systemic changes, embed some of these processes into legally binding codes, laws. For example, legally protect green blue spaces in their master plans, identify green blue spaces and protect them in their master plans, or amend building codes itself. And they are sort of enshrined in the building codes, which include active and passive cooling for buildings, what kind of materials should be used, what kind of setbacks should be allowed, or even maybe revise labor codes and enshrine it in the labor codes itself, that every heat season, when a heat wave is declared, you have to have these kind of working timings that should be operational. What kind of housing should outdoor laborers be provided during heat season? So those kind of things, a little bit more systemic and have the potential for transformation. And we see that cities like Ahmedabad, Bhubaneswar, and Jodhpur have some potential for those kind of actions. And I have to mention that Ahmedabad, for example, is a forerunner of heat action plans. Ahmedabad was one of the first cities, even globally, to come up with a heat action plan, and they have a long experience of actually dealing with heat that they have drawn into doing this heat action plan. Ahmedabad's heat action plan was first commissioned in 2013 after the 2010 heat waves, which saw many loss of lives in the magnitude of thousands. So there is a huge history behind this, which has helped the city to really understand how to implement transformative kind of actions in their heat action plans. So broadly summarizing, there's a long way to go for many cities to move from incremental to transformative. There is a start. Most cities are thinking about incremental, but it has to move from incremental to reformist, and then the ultimate goal has to be transformative changes in how they address heat action in the cities. So I'd like to conclude by saying that specifically for heat action and heat management, it still remains reactive and incremental. Some cities are showing promise, but while these cities are showing promise, actually there's a huge knowledge gap that doesn't look at the effectiveness of most of these action plans. So while there are a lot of plans that recommend certain actions, there's not enough studies that sort of capture the effectiveness of some of these solutions, right? So in the absence of that knowledge, one is not confidently able to say that yes, the amount of money you're investing in this particular action is moving towards an effective solution. So that is problematic, and there's a lot of knowledge gap there. There is still thin institutionalization of heat governance management, and this is very much in line with what is happening with climate governance in the country, right? The critique of climate governance in the country is also that it's very fragmented. There's no one body that takes care of it. Because of many departments coming together, you don't get effective solutions, or implementation challenges remain. And all of that is because of thin institutionalization, and that is reflected also in the heat management and heat governance in the country. And the last point I'd like to leave you with is that, yes, while we are sort of really, sort of prepping to respond to existing and current heat challenges, we are not taking into account the future profile of heat risk. And actually, we do know what the future of heat risk looks like, because there's a lot of science and data and modeling exercises that show how the nature of heat is going to change, how temperature is going to exacerbate. We also have demographic details. We also have an idea of how urbanization trends are going to play out. So right now, none of the heat action plans or none of the climate action plans are taking into account what future will look like. And plans ideally should be able to respond to 10, 20, 30 years to the future, right? And that is currently missing both across heat and climate action planning in the country. So I'll stop with that. I just also wanted to leave you with this report that one of our project teams have come up with. It's called Shifting Grounds, and it's particularly interesting for journalists because this is a report that talks about how do you report about climate migration in the country, right? So climate change is driving migration to a large extent, and migration has its own sort of complications. So when both of these quite complex issues come together, what does sensitive reporting looks like? So I think for you audience, this might be quite a useful resource. So feel free to look at it. So thank you. I'll stop with that. This is a picture from Bangalore, the city where I'm located. And right now we are in a beautiful bloom of tebebuyas all around. So it looks like a little Japan in some places. Yeah,
Wow.
thank you.
Wow. Thanks, Pratigna. So before I go to Vaishnavi, I would request you to briefly say a few things about the urban heat islands. So are they working? To what extent? Is there anything which you want to say about? I mean, are there any particular insights on that?
Yeah.
And also, you referred to these gaps as far as the clarity about the future strategy is concerned. So, are we in a position to pick certain responsibilities? So, how can we put that in perspective? What are the real gaps? Who needs to step in and how?
Yeah. Yeah. So let me respond to your first question around urban heat islands. Urban heat island is a very real problem in urban areas. And like I said, mostly because how the city is planned, what kind of materials are being used to build cities. And that has a very real and serious implication on how heat is felt in the cities. I spoke a little bit about how cities experience more heat than its surrounding, right? And one of the big reasons is because of this urban heat island. Now, it's also for us, a lot of cities, when you look at a lot of cities in India, you see there is a very similar kind of growth trajectory, right? IT corridors, and IT has an imagination of glass buildings, sort of echoing from what we see in the West. So there is a certain imagination of what a developed city looks like, but unfortunately, that imagination is not good for the climate. And also because of the fact that cities are becoming more and more dense, there's a lot of urbanization happening, a lot of movement from both rural areas into cities, but also between towns and cities, there's a lot of movement happening. So cities are growing, there's rapid urbanization, there's a concentration of activities, all of which give rise to very, very dense settlements, and dense settlements of a certain kind, which favor the use of materials such as glass and steel. And because of all of this, including glass and steel, but also the material that we use to pave our roads, to concrete our roads, and also you see that these days in cities there are hardly any spaces which are non sort of concretized, right? Or which
Absolutely.
are just ground, which can absorb more heat. So all of these materials sort of aid in the absorption and reflection of heat a lot more than other areas. So that gives rise to localized increase in temperature, and that is what is known as urban heat island. So of course there are ways to think about it. Of course there's a lot more that needs to be done in terms of urban planning. How do we think of materials? Can we have building codes that sort of regulate the use of such highly reflective material? Can we have master planning that looks at where are the open spaces, how much should we build, how much should we leave open? And these are all quite large questions, and these are questions also that can lead us towards transformative change, like I spoke about. So there is a huge potential for addressing urban heat islands, which will have definitely quite a large impact on how heat is felt in the cities. And very quickly, speaking to the second question you asked about where are the gaps and how it needs to be filled, this is a very large challenge. The challenge of institutional thinness that I spoke about, any city not having a necessarily dedicated department that looks at climate change. Things are changing a little bit now. In cities such as Bangalore, we do have a climate action cell who is thinking about, interdepartmental coordination in order to respond to climate change. But this is a governance challenge, really. So we do need to have structures at city level that sort of encourages interdepartmental coordination. We do need budgeting and finance structures that allows for climate action to be taken up more seriously and less dependence on external funding or external partnership. There is work that is happening in this direction. There are some cities that are more seriously thinking about such questions than other. Bombay is the first city that has a climate budget. Even in Bangalore right now, I have heard that 100 crores has been dedicated to ward level climate action plans. So there are different cities that are thinking about this, but it's not yet been institutionalized. It's still at the stage of experimentation, and we do need to move from experimentation to uptake at a larger scale and some sort of institutionalization of these early lessons that we are getting from the different cities. I'll stop at that.
Yeah, thank you. So, Vaishnavi, now let me turn to you. You have reported on several aspects of the climate action in different cities, in different geographies across the country. So I would like to ask you, so what are the most common mitigation and adaptation measures in various Indian cities, in Delhi, and how the cities are, how those responses from the government, from the communities are being received.
Right. Thanks, Athar. Yeah, no, if we were to talk about heat in specific, right? Like we just talked about heat action plans. And if you were to pick up a heat action plan across cities, municipalities, different states, one thing that possibly will remain the same is this one intervention about cool roofs, or this intervention, one part of which is where you kind of paint the top of a roof white, which helps to reflect the heat, and thereby uh, they are experienced temperatures inside that room are much lower than what it is outside. So it's a very low hanging fruit. It's kind of cheaper than a lot of other interventions would be around heat. And this is one common mitigation aspect structurally that we see across states. And so I thought it'll be interesting to maybe take you all through a ground reporting that I did on this aspect. And I was keen to see what this really means on ground for people who actually have done these Kuru solutions. So just to give you a little bit of a background, this reporting that I did was of a place in Delhi near RK Puram, if any of you are familiar with the city. And this was like a lower economic housing society. Most of the people that lived here were those who engaged in recycling waste materials. So, people who deal with scraps, like they would sell metal, plastic, those kind of things. So here there was a NGO called Chintan that had helped the locality here to see if this solution helps them or not. So in the first round, the NGO basically helped them with the paint. They gave them the material. They also gave them labor that would help them paint the roofs. So the first year, people were really happy. They actually did experience temperatures that were lower than what they were experiencing outside. But after a year, which was around the time that I went and I spoke with the people there, they spoke of how in a lot of the roofs, they had started to notice that the white paint had started to chip off, which is not good because the effectiveness of that white paint and how it helps to reduce the temperatures would then start reducing. And that was one thing that people commonly had a problem with. And when they realized, they decided, okay, let's just paint it again. The cost that it was coming up to the entire process, buying the paint and everything, was around 3,000 rupees. And so for a lot of people there, this was a lot of money to invest in a house, especially in cases where they were renting the house. They didn't even own the house. So the common thing was that why should we invest this much money if we're only renting the house, right? And interestingly, the same NGO did a follow-up study to see how effective the school roof solution was in that locality. And they found the same thing, that in that locality, there was not even a single house that did not have the paint coming off or did not have that the paint was chipping. So it was a common problem for all of those houses that had participated in this program. And then when I started to speak more with people and they kind of shared their experiences as well as with other NGOs and organizations that work on this particular intervention across cities, there were a lot of things that came up which basically show that even a solution as fairly simple as painting a roof white cannot be it cannot be the same solution for all kind of houses. So you cannot have the same size fits all approach. So, for instance, people also talked about how in localities like this, a lot of the roofs are also tin roofs, and no matter what, the effectiveness of painting a tin roof white would still be lower just because of how much it heats up. There were also issues where they talked about how in this case, like I said, that a lot of people dealt with selling waste material. So roofs for them were a very important storage area. So all of the material that they would collect through the day, they would actually store it on the roof. And in those cases, it wasn't possible to paint the roof white. And so a lot of the people in that locality had decided to not do this white roof painting again because of this reason. And so, in a different locality in Delhi, the same NGO also tried a different kind of cooling solution. Instead of painting it, they basically took plastic bottles and filled it with water and covered the roofs with that. The idea again was that it will kind of reflect the heat. In those cases, what happened was a challenge which they probably didn't expect. But because again, this locality was very close to one of these three large waste dumping sites. There are people who again engage with collecting material and selling it. A lot of those plastic bottles got stolen because they are good resources to be, kind of to be sold. And that was a challenge that the NGO did not expect that this is something that would happen. But it was through these kind of, in both these cases, it was a pilot project for them, and they realized that these kind of solutions, they look great on paper, but on ground they actually have such different kind of challenges just as how they get implemented. And even in some cases they tried another kind of solution where you have a specific kind of material that you put on the roof. It's like a fiber come something else. I forgot what the technical name for it was. But in those cases, what happened was that because there was a little gap between the roof, the ceiling, and this material, there were a lot of rats that started to live there, and that became a problem for the people who were living in the house. So they rejected that solution as well. So this is just like in my experience, a very interesting reporting experience where such a simple solution on ground was kind of seeing these different kind of problems. And it was also a good experience to see that there are NGOs that are trying a lot of different kind of sub solutions to the schooling roof situation. So far they've also tried this is a different NGO that has been trying what they call a more dynamic solution, wherein they create like a structure on the roof, which is kind of like panels. So you can shut the panels. It's a very simple, like a rotating thing where you shut the panel in the morning so the heat doesn't come in, and in the night you kind of open it so the heat escapes. So that was, according to the people who had used it, they kind of ranked that as the most effective solution. But the drawback to that is that it's expensive to get this kind of machinery on, and all the material that this required. So now the question is that how do we kind of make it cheaper for these other solutions that seem to be working better? And I think those are things which we probably have to also look into, which like how Pratigna ma'am was also saying, right, that we don't at the moment have a lot of studies that tell us how effective these solutions or these measures of heat action plans are. And this cooling roofs was just like, it's such a small part of these heat action plans. But even there if you go on ground and you kind of look into it, you'll find that there are several things that are working, but there are several things that are not. And yeah, I just wanted to share that experience from a reporter's point of view to bring that in, that if slowly perhaps we report on smaller kind of solutions that are coming in, talking to experts who are involved in this, as well as people who have experienced these solutions. I think it might give us at least like a first round of how whether this is being effective or not, or what parts of it are being effective.
No, thank you. So we didn't, talk about flooding. I mean, flooding has been a regular, feature. I mean, that's almost happening every year in cities like Bengaluru, Delhi, Mumbai. So it is, it's a consistent, problem which people are grappling with. So are there any, experiences about that? What is being done about this, problem which happens again and again? So have there been certain solutions which have been introduced? How, to what extent they are working? Maybe both of you can, reflect on that.
Sure, yeah. Again, speaking from Delhi, and I mean, generally, when we talk about urban flooding, that's usually different than what you would see, say, in the Indo-Gangetic Plain, which is it's connected with how, rivers are flooding and the areas around them get flooded. If I
Mhm.
were to talk about Delhi specifically, even when the Yamuna is not, at a high flood level, Delhi as a city still sees, urban flooding happening in areas. And that has to do a lot with many factors, but like in the case of Delhi, there are two things that majorly impact this. One is stormwater drains, and how in Delhi there are several issues around these drains currently that are not allowing the water to drain naturally out into the in the case of Delhi into the Yamuna. And so these issues are really vast. We did a very long story on this, and it basically talked about how several patches of these drains have construction over it, and these constructions could be things like a parking lot, for example. So say almost like 2 kilometers of this drain has a construction over it, and there's no way that you can clean and maintain the silt and the mud beneath this patch of the stormwater drain. So now, if even a very less amount of rainfall is happening, it does end up flooding and coming out of those stormwater drains. The other, and in the case of Delhi, also, it also has naturally 2-3 nalas, or again drains. These are the more natural stormwater drains that have existed in Delhi, always to be able to carry out this exact function, to take out the rainwater. And even there, we see a lot of construction that's happening on these natural drains as well. They're not being maintained. So there are all of these issues that kind of they pile up and cause this kind of urban flooding, even with very less rainfall. So in terms of the solutions, Athar, like you were asking, Delhi this year has started working on an updated stormwater mapping drainage system, which hopefully will be helpful, because at this point, another critique has also been that the stormwater drains that have been constructed by the government have been very narrow, or they're they're very narrow, and they're not enough to carry out the volume of rainwater. But at this point, it's very hard to replace that entire structure, right? So what is it that can be done? So now this year, the Delhi government has started working on an updated drainage map. So we are yet to see how this will look. Other than that, the solutions that we usually see, if you are in Delhi, just before the rains, you will see a lot of these manholes with a pile of silt next to them, and there are people who actually do work. They physically go down to these to the drains to take out all of this silt, in just making sure that there's enough there's enough space in these drains to carry out the water. So that's something commonly that we see, but that's a very small part of maintaining these stormwater drains at a larger level. Yeah.
No, thank you. So I will stop for a moment and I will check if there are any questions. So I don't think there are any questions. So Pratigna, maybe
I do
you
see a
can.
bunch of questions in my chat. I'm
Oh,
not sure if you, yeah, so I'm not sure if this is only for me, but I do see a bunch of
maybe
questions.
there's a direct
Would
message.
you like me to read it out and then take
Yeah,
the,
yeah, please go
yeah.
ahead. Please go ahead.
So, Bharti says, isn't the unbridled construction across cities contributing greatly to UHIs? The relaxed FSI rules are reportedly pushing a lot of opportunistic demolition and redevelopment. We see this in our locality in Chennai. That is true. Yeah. See, actually, construction is not so much the problem. Okay. We do, at least India's stand on climate action has always been that we will prioritize development, and then, we will do also undertake climate action, but prioritizing development. So, for cities to develop, we do need infrastructure, we do need building to happen. But I think the question is, we have to think, at least the solution is in thinking about it systematically, right? So it means that we do need to think about building codes that allow certain kinds of construction in certain places to happen. We do need a regulation over the kind of materials that are used for construction. We don't necessarily have to use glass and steel all the time, right? We do have other alternate construction materials that can help mediate the problem or mitigate the problem of urban heat islands. But for that, industry also has to support. The industry has to provide building solutions that are less heat intensive, or materials at a reasonable price that can be scaled up, which doesn't necessarily retain heat or absorb a lot of heat or reflect a lot of heat. So this is, again, one has to think about it from a systemic perspective, where solutions from industry, solutions from regulation, solutions from even mindset and behavior change should all come together in order to respond to a certain problem like this. There was another question around from Eliza that talks about, can you please comment on the role of AI policy in heat governance in the Indian context? Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm going to respond to this question from an AI policy point of view, but at least the application of AI has a huge scope in trying to work through heat governance in the country. And I think there are already early examples. One of the best uses of AI is to actually get data from the ground and get very localized data as to where heat is concentrating, what kind of materials are leading to what kind of heat signatures, and how can we also prioritize response even spatially. If we have the kind of data, and especially real time in heat wave season, about where heat is concentrating, what kind of populations live there, where do we need to sort of then prioritize the kind of response we need to. AI has a big role in collecting and mobilizing this kind of data. So I think some of the examples we are already seeing, where at a city level, AI is being implemented to gather such data, but also mobilize response quickly. So these are in early stages, and I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done for responsible use of AI in such cases, and also how we can scale it up across different contexts. There's another question, and perhaps Vaishnavi could take this. Could either of you tell how much flood mitigation can be implemented in Indian cities? Is there any success story from urban India around flood mitigation?
I'm not sure about success stories, but definitely I think one of the things that usually do get ignored with flood mitigation is just if there is a river that's again, close to a city. Again, I'm talking about Delhi. Several other cities also kind of have the same issue, whether it's Pune, even with Chennai, right? A natural river also has a natural floodplain with it. And the entire function of the floodplain is to be able to absorb this kind of extra water that's coming during the monsoons. And in a lot of cases, you will see that this floodplain is being used for different purposes. So you'll have construction that's built on these floodplains. In Delhi, there are entire upper middle class colonies that are built on these floodplains. There is now an entire project of river development that's happening, riverfront development that's happening, which again is sorry, one sec. Which again is right next to, it's on the floodplain itself. So if you're going to construct on the floodplain, there is no way that a river naturally is going to be able to buffer the city from a probable flood. So that's one thing that's, I think it's very important. It usually does get ignored. I think Pune has the same issue with the river that goes through it. Again, the floodplain and the challenges that it sees just because it's being diverted to a different use. So yeah, I wanted to just point that out. But yeah, I'm not sure of success stories. None come to my mind at this point.
Mhm. Mhm.
But if they do, I'll definitely share it.
So can you see any question? Is there any question in your chat box? If you can check.
There is, I think, one more about heat action plans. One
Mhm.
second. Sanjana was asking that we are discussing rising temperatures and government's heat action plans, but as a reporter from Aurangabad who covers Adivasi regions in Maharashtra, I see that many villages still lack basic infrastructure like electricity. So, in such context, how can these plans actually be implemented on ground? And how can climate planning better include and protect these communities who are already facing the worst impacts of climate change?
Yeah. Yes, this is a big problem. But one of the biggest critiques that we have made of the climate action, of the heat action plans we have reviewed, and also I have sort of seen this change over time, is the fact that before you start planning, you should actually take account of the differential vulnerabilities that exist, right? And the point that Vaishnavi made in her previous intervention, that one solution doesn't fit all. You may have a great solution, but that is not replicable across groups of people, or and it's very, very context specific. It is very it's differentiated along many sort of axes. So one of the things that we have recommended, and I hope this gets taken up more seriously, is that before we start planning, there has to be a more differential vulnerability assessment plan. Vulnerability assessment plans are already part of planning, but a more differentiated, a more context, a context specific vulnerability plan sometimes helps think about solutions that are more responsive to the particular context and people that we are talking about. So for example, the Mumbai Climate Action Plan, when they formulated the Mumbai Climate Action Plan, they also formulated a vulnerability assessment plan that does look at all these differentiations and how can you conduct a vulnerability assessment plan in a much more sensitive and a layered manner. But having said all that, I think the onus of conducting these assessments before planning also lies with the government, and there are challenges for the government to implement it the way it is being recommended. Challenges being financial, technical, knowledge, capacities, all of that. But we should move towards more context specific solutioning at a city level, and breaking it down from the city level further down to ward level might be also a way to think about it. And in the district, again, the district itself is composed of many kinds of regions and populations that live in that. Again, differentiating our assessments across these things might be a helpful way to move forward.
Okay. So that's all we had time for. I think we are done, unless you have something more to add. Otherwise, I think the time is over now. It's already 1 o'clock, 1 p.m. So, do you want to share anything further, or we can just wind it up? Any additional thoughts?
All the
I'm
best to the crew here.
Thank you. Thank you all.